Angela Flournoy created a stir in the literary world with her first novel, The Turner House. The novel was a finalist for the National Book Award, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and a finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. The novel takes place in present-day Detroit and features the multi-generational story of the Turner family.
I always knew that I wanted the book to focus on the first and the last, sort of this big line of children for a lot of reasons, but one, because it was a way to be able to examine sort of the history of a house and a family over a large period of time, and among people who are ostensibly of the same generation, but not really of the same generation, so their experiences and their expectations and their responsibilities are different. So Cha-Cha, he's 64 and he's retired, and he sort of is going through, I don't know, maybe like a late midlife crisis, and he feels like the strain of familial responsibility, whereas Layla, she's 40, she's got one daughter, but she's an adult. She really just has to look out for herself. She doesn't feel that pressure. She does feel like the expectations of her family, just sort of being the baby, but she doesn't feel that pressure to solve other people's problems. And it's one thing that sort of came out of just exploring those characters is, in a lot of ways, the character with the least amount of expectations is the one who can't really manage anything, which I don't think is that unusual.
The novel is more than a story of the family. It also symbolizes the struggle African American families have had as they establish themselves as part of the middle class.
The more that I researched about the history of Detroit, and particularly African Americans in Detroit, and the large amount of them that migrated between like the 20s and the 50s for work during the Great Migration, the more that housing in particular became really central, both to those early migrants, like, you know, they were making more money, they were working in factories, they were working in World War II and sort of in development and industry, and they had more money, but they had nowhere to live. And they had both sort of federal, like redlining happening, and then just individual real estate pacts in neighborhoods that were preventing them from getting homes. So this was like the beginning of people trying to sort of grasp at the middle class in the city, and then they get the homes, and then to see them sort of depreciated in like one generation by the 80s and 90s, sort of in the post-crack epidemic years, is something that's really heartbreaking, but also really, in my opinion, sort of fascinating how these migrants really did contend with that, and how the fact that any of them owned a home was really spectacular considering the obstacles against them. So home ownership became central to me, to the way that I understand what happened in, say, like the last 60 years in Detroit.
Flournoy's love of history encouraged her to spend time researching the backgrounds used in the Turner House to help weave her story.
I do like history, and I really love procrastination. And so research became a way to not have to like make certain like writing decisions. It's like, well, I'll just read one more book like about, you know, the United Auto Workers, just to see if it's useful. And so the first year, I really did not write that much, but I read a lot of books, both nonfiction, a little bit of fiction, but a lot of oral histories, and also kind of urban studies of like what happened in Detroit. And I didn't agree with all of them, but it was interesting to get this like wide variety of opinions and just so many statistics. And it made me realize that what was missing is a lot of these things can tell you what happened, but they don't really tell you what it felt like. And I think that's where fiction can really fill a void.
The desire to become an author started early in Flournoy's life.
My writing background really began, I've been writing or wanting to write since I learned how to read, since I was very young. So I went to undergrad at USC in Los Angeles, and I was an English major there. And then I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop in Iowa City, and I got a master's degree in creative writing. And really throughout that, it's a trial and error thing where you really learn by doing and by reading a lot, and finally I decided that I had this idea and I was just going to work on it and see what came of it, and it ended up being my first book.
For those who are inspired by her works and want to start writing, Flournoy's advice is simple: read.
I think more than anything is to read really widely and to be open to reading things that seem like they're outside of your taste, but they are in line with what you want to do. So if I want to write, like this book is a multi-POV novel, and it's also sort of, so that means there's a lot of characters who we're following around, and it's also a book that is jumps around time. I just talked to people about it, and then they would suggest books to me. They were books I would never read because they're just not my fun books, but they were books that I ended up learning so much from. And so I would say be open to kind of having to follow that inspiration and that learning path wherever it leads you.
BCPL talked with Flournoy at the first annual BC Reads, a month-long reading event sponsored by BCPL that brought authors, speakers, and performers to Baltimore County to connect all of us through reading and the arts.